on, everyone? It's the Hub City Hoops Talk podcast. We got Jacob Harris. I'm Austin Massey. We got a special episode for you guys today. We're going to be going over the Big 12 power rankings kind of through our eyes. So we're going to start with Jacob's list today, then we'll go into mine. We'll kind of go back and forth on maybe why we had certain teams ahead of others. But just full disclosure, this is a hard list to create. Every team in the Big 12 could just about, beat each other on any given night, maybe besides the Oklahoma States and West Virginias of the world. Sorry to those fans if you're watching. But yeah, this is an incredibly hard list to create for us. I mean, like I said, especially at like the 1 through 6, you could really interchange, a lot of these teams. I think Houston's kind of solidified themselves as the favorite right now, Jacob. But let's just dive right in, man. I'm going to share your list first. So that way our viewers can critique you first. And then we'll go into my list. So
I really feel like the top and bottom of both of ours are going to be like very, very similar.
Yeah,
it's kind of in the middle. So I kind of ranked them kind of as tiers, kind of like I'm sure you did. The bottom tier and the top team were the two easiest. Obviously the bottom tier, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, and UCF. I just don't think those teams are going to make the tournament. West Virginia lost to Oklahoma State. I know I could have probably flip-flopped those two, but I decided not to because they've beaten Kansas. And Oklahoma State's been, not just terrible. I mean, they've only won one game, but they've been in a ton. Obviously, the top team, Houston, I know that they're second currently to the Red Raiders in the standings, but they've beaten Texas Tech. I don't know how many more they lose down the stretch. I think they're the most talented team in the conference. I think they probably have the first or second best coach in the conference. They probably have one of the best pure point guards in the conference in Shed. I think they're easily a top 5 team in the nation. So that's why I put them there. Kind of the next tier is the 2 and 3 spot for me, Texas Tech and Iowa State. Texas Tech has more road victories. So I'm going to I went ahead and put the Red Raiders above Iowa State. The next kind of, I guess, the next few teams were kind of harder for me. I put Kansas State ahead of Baylor and Kansas because I think Baylor is better than Kansas and Kansas State beat Baylor. I think Kansas is wildly overrated, and I'm sure I think we've kind of talked about that a little bit. I just don't know what Kansas brings. They have about 4 really, really good players, and then their bench is just this ginormous drop off. So I don't think they're all that great. BYU, Texas, and Oklahoma and Cincinnati, I think are all going to be tournament teams, but I feel like those 4 teams are going to kind of be fighting for the 8 through 11 spot. I think the 11 spot probably won't make the tournament just because of a number standpoint. But I think right now Cincinnati is still a very quality team. Obviously, the Red Raiders play them on Saturday. I have BYU over Texas and Texas over Oklahoma because BYU just beat Texas and Texas just beat Oklahoma. So there it is, my wonderful power rankings. And I'm sure, and I sincerely hope that they get roasted because,
I don't think there's
right?
Yeah. And I don't really think right now with how close things are, no one's going to be able to create a power ranking that all the other fan bases are happy or sold on.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Because, just even looking at your list, like I could debate this back and forth too. A lot of people may think Iowa State should be ahead of Texas Tech. Obviously right now with Texas Tech's record, you really just can't put Iowa State in front of Texas Tech. Texas Tech's 11-1 in their last 12 games. So, I mean, outside of Houston, I think it's fair to have Tech at 2, even from like a non-biased standpoint. I definitely think Iowa State's the firm, 3 though right now in the conference.
Absolutely.
And at any given point, Iowa State could definitely surpass Texas Tech. I think they have a legit team, especially at home. I mean, they're not going to lose at home. Texas Tech's been obviously elite at home, but that could always change. You never really know what's going to happen here. And then looks like we are pretty similar on TCU. Let me go ahead and share mine really quick. Our list is actually relatively similar. Here's mine. I think some of the core differences. So for our viewers that are maybe listening on Spotify or Apple, here's my list. I had Houston at 1, Tech at 2, Iowa State at 3, TCU at 4, BYU at 5, Kansas at 6, Baylor at 7, Kansas State at 8, Oklahoma at 9, Texas at 10. Yes, I did put Oklahoma in front of Texas, even though they just got clobbered. I'll explain that in a little bit. Cincinnati at 11, UCF at 12, West Virginia at 13, Oklahoma State at 14. I think the bottom 3 are going to be pretty consensus, probably bottom 4 actually too.
Yeah, I would think so, unless Cincinnati comes up and beats somebody big.
Yeah, and I mean, again, Cincinnati is definitely a tier above the West Virginia and Oklahoma States of the conference, in my opinion.
Yes.
But yeah, just diving into the list again, you could easily, interchange Iowa State and Texas Tech, in my opinion. I think they're both very equal teams. If you put them on a neutral court, that would be a hell of a game. I would love to watch that game. But out of sheer record purposes right now, and kind of just looking at Texas Tech's body of work over the last, month and a half, Texas Tech has to have the edge there. Their only loss is to Houston on the road, which is arguably the hardest place to play in college basketball right now. So I love Texas Tech's body of work. I think they deserve the 2 right now. Iowa State 3, they deserve that as well. You and I, interestingly enough, both had TCU at 4. And some fans that are watching this may feel like that's too high. But I really would urge you to go and kind of look at TCU's body of work, at least in conference play. They should have beat Kansas. They got hosed by the refs. They have a really quality win at home against Houston. They went on the road and beat Baylor. They did lose to Cincinnati in overtime on the road, but again, one of those kind of freak games. They did have a pretty commanding lead, and I think Cincy made some pretty killer shots down the end there. I did have BYU at 5, which was, I actually think I had Kansas initially at 5, and I kind of slotted them back and forth. I think BYU's offense is what's going to keep them around in the league here, and I think they're gonna be pretty tough to beat at home as well. So I put them ahead of Kansas, and for the same reasons. I think Kansas is just this roster that they have this year is just not it. And I don't mean that in a way of like they're not a good team, because they are. I just mean it's not really what Kansas fans are probably used to. And I think that, you obviously have the 2 superstars and Dickinson and McCullough, but the depth and the lack of scoring, I think, is really kind of their main concern. If you shut down Dickinson and McCullough, we all Tech fans have watched McCullough for years. I mean, the guy has really taken his game to a new level, but he's not really like a guy that's going to take over a game offensively, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I haven't looked at his numbers, but he has been turnover prone in the past, which can kill games as well. Baylor at 7, though. Baylor and Kansas State, you could easily interchange them as well, in my opinion. I put Baylor ahead of Kansas State because I think Baylor just overall is a better team. But Kansas State, I think, they play such good defense, and they have that 3-headed monster, and Perry, Kaluma, and Carter. So, I mean, they're a team that could get hot. They're a team I expect to make the tournament. Oklahoma and Texas. So the reason I put Oklahoma in front of Texas is just because of Texas, their inconsistency, quite frankly. They lost at home to UCF. They have a couple bad losses, and it's like they're just too sporadic for me. I think Oklahoma is a more consistent team, and I think if you put them on a neutral court, I think Oklahoma would beat Texas right now. But again, it was tough for me to put Oklahoma ahead of Texas just because they literally just beat them a couple of games ago at their own house. But again, I don't necessarily think one game should dictate the power rankings here. Overall body of work, Oklahoma does have a great body of work. The analytics favor Oklahoma as well. But Texas is a team that I don't necessarily think, most sites are going to have them in the tournament as of now. But if they can win a couple Q1 games, put together some kind of body of work, they have a chance to make it. Same with Cincinnati. I think right now they're on the outside looking in. But very good team. I like Wes Miller a lot at Cincinnati. I think they have a good roster. I think they can compete with just about anyone at home. I think away is where they're going to struggle. And then bottom of the conference, UCF, West Virginia, Oklahoma State. I don't think we need to talk too much about them. I think that, I think everyone kind of thought UCF would struggle a little bit this year. They've actually been a good surprise so far for the Big 12. They haven't just gotten steamrolled. They're well coached, and they actually have a quality win on the road at Texas. And they actually beat Kansas at home. So from a win standpoint, that's they have some good wins. I do feel bad. You could probably maybe replace UCF in Cincinnati, or maybe if you even want to consider putting Texas below UCF, I could see that as well. Again, a lot of these are toss-up guys, so don't take our list too seriously. I think that the thing about the Big 12 is on any given night, like I said earlier, any team can beat anyone, especially at home. But yeah, Jacob, I guess just starting at that, let's just start with that top tier, right? I feel like Houston has kind of really separated themselves from the rest of the field. Obviously, Iowa State beat Houston at home. TCU beat Houston at home. But right now, it seems like those two losses are kind of behind them, and they are playing incredible ball right now.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is obviously, I think it's the best team in the conference. Kind of like I said, just they have a lot of like really, really elite level things in their program. Obviously, I don't really know how many people expected Iowa State and Texas Tech to be the top two or 2 and 3, I guess, in this conference right now. I think a lot of people had slotted a TCU or a Kansas or a Baylor above them, but so far the results say differently, and it's been very, very fun to watch. And I think any of these three right now, I think Houston's probably the runaway leader for the conference championship. But I feel like if they continue to kind of not necessarily struggle, but have less efficient defensive games on the road, that a Texas Tech or an Iowa State right now are the two top candidates to kind of go up and catch them.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't foresee them. Tonight's actually a big game. They play they play Texas tonight on the road. Texas is historically the last few years played pretty good at home. Obviously, Tech went in and whooped up on them, and so did UCF. But they still have a pretty good overall home record the last 2 years since they moved into the new stadium. But I think Texas is going to give them their best matchup tonight. They're obviously, anytime you're playing a top 5 team at home, that's going to be a game that you get up for, that you're excited to play in. Rodney Terry hopefully should have the guys ready to play, for Texas for his sake, because I have a feeling he's going to have a pretty short leash there. He may get 2 seasons to kind of get things rolling. Yeah. And if he doesn't, make a Sweet 16 in those first 2 seasons, he may be gone. But yeah, I think for now, Houston has kind of separated themselves in terms of their defense, man. It's just, especially come tournament time when you're playing on a neutral court, when Iowa State is an incredibly hard place to play. And not taking anything away from them, but I don't know how much the win against Houston at home was a gigantic win. Beating Houston is a top 5 win of the whole season for any team. Don't take anything away from Iowa State. I just think if you put those teams on a neutral court, I think Houston wins 8 out of 10 times or something like that. And same can be said against Texas Tech. I think if you put Tech and Houston on a neutral court, they probably win something similar to that. And that's because of their defense. So I think they've separated themselves and they earned the right for number 1. Obviously, they do have the 2 conference losses, which is kind of a blemish, but their overall body of work is really solid. Texas Tech, Iowa State, TCU, BYU. The next tier is really, it's a lot of teams, right? It really is. I feel like Baylor maybe has dropped off that second tier a little bit. Yeah, I feel like they kind of have, but I think BYU, TCU, Iowa State, Texas Tech. You could probably throw Kansas in there, just because they're a championship, team. They have great coaches. They have a couple superstar players, all Big 12 players. But those teams right there, man, I mean, they're so close. Like, they really are. I mean, we could do this video in 2 weeks and it could look completely different, right? So in general, I would kind of categorize this as the second tier, almost virtual locks sort of to make the tournament, I guess you could say. And then going into that tier 3, that's where, I see it. And again, these tiers aren't super far apart, in my opinion. So the second tier and the third tier are pretty close in the Big 12. But I would kind of put Baylor, Kansas State, Oklahoma kind of in that third tier. I feel like, I don't know if Texas deserves to be in that third tier quite yet. just because they're, I mean, yeah, they don't have the wins they need. I mean, they did go on the road and beat Cincinnati. I think that was a fine win. But they need to do so. I mean, you beat Houston tonight, and all of a sudden, we can have some talks about them being in that third tier and being on the bubble. But yeah, it's just, I mean, dude, right now, I think you and I are projecting 9 or 10 teams to get in the tournament.
I would say 10 probably at the end of the day. And I think I'm a bit higher on Kansas State than I think most are. I think I had them at number 5.
Yeah.
And I had BYU at 8, and I think that was the biggest difference kind of in our rankings. I just kind of think that Kansas State kind of has more elite firepower with that 3-headed monster there, and I feel like I trust Jerome Tang more later in the season than I do Coach Pope over at BYU. Nothing against him. I think he's a great coach. I just think I trust Tang a little bit more, and so that's why I kind of put them where I had them. But
it's a fair point.
Like you said,
I was going to say they played back-to-back games on the road against Iowa State and Houston. So, yeah, I mean, maybe the rankings are a little bit skewed right now, but Kansas State's a damn good team. Like they're a team that I don't think I would want to play in the NCAA tournament, because it's like they play such good defense. They're so well coached. And then you have 3 guys who could just, go off in any given night offensively. Maybe not. Kaluma is not really, the more I've watched him, he's not really a takeover offensive kind of guy, but he doesn't force shots. Like, he plays so smart. He's very versatile. He's long. But Cam Carter and Tyler Perry, they could give you 25 points on any given night.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a team I'm higher on than most others, but like you said, these kind of tiers that we talk about, like, they're so close. Like the top tiers are so close to each other. I mean, if one of these teams has a bad night, I mean, like, say forbid, like, an Iowa State or a Texas Tech loses 2 games this week. I mean, they could drop, 4 or 5 spots, but still be great for the NCAA tournament play. Like, it's not the end of the world if you lose 2 games in a row in this conference. Like, I mean, Houston did it, and they're our top team right now. I mean, it just kind of depends on how everybody else is playing. I think this is going to be, one of the most competitive. Obviously, this is the most competitive league in the country, and it's a whole thing.
Yeah, it's insane. It really is. And I mean, when you're playing in a conference this tough, it's really not fair to penalize teams for, like, for instance, Kansas State, right? I think they are a shining example, because there are really, I mean, good luck finding any teams in the country, maybe outside of the elite kind of top 4-ish teams, the Purdue's, the UConns, the North Carolinas right now. Even you could throw them into that back-to-back matchup against Iowa State on the road and Houston on the road. I mean, maybe those teams go 1-1, right? But Iowa State is probably one of the hardest places to play in the entire country. Houston, they're not necessarily known for having like a rowdy environment, but it's more about, like, they have a relatively loud stadium, and their level of efficiency at home is just remarkable. I think I read a stat the other day that at home they're winning games by like 25 points per game or something like that for the whole season, even with Big 12 play. So
that's an insane stat.
I mean, they are blowing people out of the water. I mean, they blew out a great Kansas State team. They blew out a Texas Tech team who is first in the Big 12 right now. They obviously blew out UCF, but they are just really good. So I do agree with you with Kansas State, and with them being 8th in my power rankings, that's not a knock on them at all. That's just it has to do with them losing back-to-back games. Anytime a team loses back-to-back games, even though it was the hardest stretch of their schedule by far, they're still a team that I expect to be in the tournament, a team that I don't want, my team to face in the tournament should they make it. And then, I think Baylor is another fascinating one because they've really struggled as of late. With Baylor, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, Jacob, but I just feel like they don't really play that much defense anymore.
No, and I feel like they're also having to rely on a lot of young talent, and then the transfer the big transfer they brought in and Ray J Dennis, he's just not very well known for defense. Like the dude's a bucket, walking bucket, but Jacoby Walter, Yves, I think his last name is pronounced Misi. Like he's like those two guys are very, very good. Obviously they're probably going to be NBA talents, but it takes time to learn how to play defense, especially at the Big 12 and a college level. And I think Scott Drew has realized this year if he wants to win big, he's going to have to do it with offense and not defense like he has in the past.
Yeah, that is true. It almost feels like the same case for Texas Tech this year, like not in terms of who they're relying on for scoring, but more so the personnel that they've built with the roster, it's just not meant to be an elite defensive team, right? Like it's the same thing for Tech. Like there's not really one player on Tech who you see as like a lockdown defender or like someone, I mean, you look at Houston and you could probably name, 6 or 7 of them. You look at Kansas State, a lot of their guys are high-level defenders from an efficiency standpoint. Iowa State, I think, plays pretty good defense. BYU is not the greatest defensively. They still have pretty good metrics. Oklahoma plays good defense. So, I mean, for a conference that really has been known in the past as like a defensive conference, their offenses are actually very efficient this year in the analytics. And it's just interesting to see how these teams kind of shift, right? Like, again, Baylor has been known to be a team who's very balanced on both sides of the ball. Now this year they're struggling a little bit because, like you said, they're relying on, a freshman heavily offensively who is, a lottery pick in my opinion. But yeah, just not they're definitely a great team offensively, but they just don't get it done enough defensively to win road games and quite frankly, beat quality teams at home like TCU. And then, Kansas, we already talked about a little bit, but I do think that their lack of depth is hurting them. And they just don't really again, I think like offensively, they just don't have the shooting power and the guard play that you would want in a kind of a championship competing team. Look at Texas Tech, look at Iowa State, look at, Houston maybe doesn't have the best guard play, but they don't need to. I mean, they could score 50 points a game and they would probably still have a pretty similar record, So their defense is what keeps them in games. And that's really that with the kind of the top tier. But Cincinnati is another team. I don't think they're going to make the tournament this year, but I do think very highly of them. I think that they'd be a tough team to go on the road and beat. A team that actually is going to play Texas Tech in Lubbock, I believe this weekend. So that's going to be a matchup that Texas Tech needs to take seriously because they are a very talented team and very well coached. Absolutely. Very interesting stuff, though. I think we all agree with the bottom tier, Jacob. I think Oklahoma State's obviously kind of cemented themselves as the worst team in the conference. Unfortunately, I do like Mike Boynton a lot.
Yes,
but
they have.
They have, and it's looking at their roster and what they don't do enough in the transfer portal, and it's like they brought in a very highly ranked freshman class, but you can't win with that in the Big 12. Ask Mark Adams from last season. Tech had a pretty highly ranked recruiting class. They brought in Elijah Fisher, they brought in Pop Isaacs, Lamar Washington, Robert Jennings, and go check out Texas Tech's record last season and get back to us. But it wasn't very good, and you just can't win in this league with freshmen, and that's just a fact. You can have one or two freshmen on the roster that contribute, but if you're relying on a whole roster full of freshmen or to be your core rotational pieces, good luck with that. So really kind of weird, kind of shocking what they did in the portal. I don't know. You probably have more insight into the NIL stuff, but my best guess is NIL at Oklahoma State for basketball is just not really where it needs to be.
It's not anywhere close to where everyone else is. And I feel like that's part of the reason they're not able to get a lot of these really big transfer talents. And I think it's part of the reason, and I don't know if Mike Boynton has a lot to do with that, but I just don't think they have enough. And if if they don't increase NIL funding, their program is not going to be the same.
Yeah, it's not, and it stinks for Mike Boynton because I mean, again, I don't know how great of a coach he is, but I do like him as a person. I think he's obviously Oklahoma State's got kind of screwed by the NCAA a little bit, and they have every right to be upset about kind of how things unfolded. I thought that they were a team that was right on the bubble last year, and of course they didn't get in last year, but it was a tough Big 12. You never want to leave yourself on the edge of the bubble as you're approaching NCAA tournament time. You never want to leave it up to something out of your control, essentially. But really a crazy loaded conference, guys. Again, this list could look completely different in 2 weeks, even in a week from now. But I do think we're starting to see solidified some different tiers in the Big 12, right? So that's really what I'm focusing on. Who's going to end up in that second tier? Is anyone going to challenge Houston for the first tier? Right now, it's hard to see that. But then again, I mean, Houston starts playing some more road games. I mean, they had back-to-back home games, and anytime, you take care of business at home, of course, but you go on the road to Texas tonight. That's going to be a really interesting matchup because, Texas is very inconsistent, but when they're really playing well, like if they could put it together for the entire game, they could be pretty decent, right? But looking at Houston's schedule, so they're actually going to Texas tonight, and then they go play Houston in Fog Allen on next Saturday. That's going to be an incredible game. Can't wait for that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so actually with Houston, 3 out of their next 4 games are road games. So they go to Houston, they play Kansas the following game, they get a kind of a cupcake against Oklahoma State at home, and then they go to Cincinnati. So that's going to be an interesting stretch. It's kind of like this stretch that Texas Tech just went on where you're like, well, if you can go 3-1 or 2-2, I think that's still a pretty big win. I would expect them to probably beat Texas tonight, but I think they'll lose to Kansas in a very tight matchup on next weekend. I think it's just a game that Kansas will get up for. But yeah, really interesting stuff. I'm the one team in this top tier that I haven't watched a ton of, unfortunately, is Iowa State. But I have seen what they've done at home. I mean, they're 3-0 in their last 3 games against 3 tournament teams. So, again, you could easily argue that Iowa State should be above Texas Tech. The only reason I didn't put them there is just based on conference records and overall, body of work over the last month and a half. Like I said, Texas Tech 11-1 since December 1st. That's probably one of the best records in all of college basketball in that time. So 2 very good teams that deserve to be towards the top. But very interested to see how Iowa State kind of, finishes out as well. So they actually go on the road to play Baylor this Saturday. And then they go on the road and play Texas. So back-to-back road games again for them. So going to be fascinating, man. Very excited to kind of watch. Tech obviously has a huge game against TCU. If you guys haven't, we did record a preview on that. It's on the YouTube and Spotify and Apple. Now go ahead and go take a watch, go listen, go watch if you want. But man, Jacob, thanks again for today. We'll probably post some pictures of these rankings for you guys, maybe on X or other social medias. But as always, guys, please subscribe if you haven't already. I think, Jacob, we're already up to like 133 now. So we appreciate all the support, guys. We'll try to keep getting you videos, every couple days. And yeah, hope you guys enjoy the rankings.